Welcome back to the No Referees podcast. I'm your host, Evarist, joined today with my special co-host, Sharif Farrow. Today on the line, we got a very, very special guest, the Chief High Performance Director of USAWP Polo. He is a guy that has about every basketball jersey in his closet. You can find him on Twitter at Coach_Abdou and on Instagram at Coach Abdou. My man, my brother from another mother, John Abdou. What's up, bro?
What's up, man? Good to see you, Evarist. Nice to meet you, Sharif. Good to have
you. John.
Yeah, man. Good to see you, brother. Hey, man, you a Lakers fan, you a Clippers fan, you a Rockets fan. I'm trying to figure out what fan you are. I know you're a huge hoop fan, but you're from Cali, so I'm trying to figure out what you're doing.
First of all, I love hoops. Second of all, I was born in Egypt. Moved to Houston right away. We moved from Egypt. I was like 2-3 years old. We go to Houston. This is like early 80s, right? So who's good in the early 80s? This is the Lakers. This is the Rockets were obviously just getting going, right? So while we were living in Houston, the Ralph Sampson, Hakeem Olajuwon days were getting going. Showtime was going. So I just loved hoops, man. My uncle, my pops, everybody was just a lot of hoops in my younger days. So while I cheer for certain teams at times, I just honestly I love the NBA. I love hoops. I love college hoops. I love all of it. So that's where it's at, man.
So you're a Clippers fan too, I see.
Yeah. Well, look, for not everybody growing up in Los Angeles can afford Laker tickets too. When we came, so when we moved from Houston, we moved to Los Angeles, right? I mean, it's not. I tell the story sometimes in our local newspaper where I was growing up in San Gabriel Valley. That newspaper would have buy one get one free Clipper tickets when they were playing at the sports arena in LA. So every time, and the Clippers were terrible, right, in this time period, but they would play the Bulls, right? They'd play the Rockets, they'd play the Knicks. So anytime I wanted to see Ewing, and if I wanted to go see Jordan, if I wanted to go see Barkley, Olajuwon, anybody, you go to the Clipper game, right? You get to buy one get one free ticket, and you get to watch these great players play. So that's how my love for the Clippers started. I still got love for them because that's how I got to watch accessible hoops. And then when you got older and you got a little money, and maybe you can afford a little bit of Laker tickets.
Oh yeah, you was rolled up to the Lakers Staples Center, back in the Shaq and Kobe days.
That's right. But so hoops is hoops, man, and it blends into all sports. So I love it, and I'm sure we all miss it right now too, because I know you're a big hoops man.
Yeah, man. Hey, I remember the very first time I went to an NBA game. Actually, I saw the old Hakeem Olajuwon. That's when they called him Akeem. He before the H. So I used to go to those games back in the day. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So these days, the coronavirus situation is going on. Everybody's talking about binge watching and Netflix and Hulu, all that good stuff. I know you're still pretty busy because you're part of the Olympic situation and trying to, navigate through those waters for next year. What are you watching at home with your wife and your kids on Netflix and Hulu, all that good stuff? And what are you recommending other people to watch?
Yeah, that's funny because I think a lot of people who have parents with kids our age ain't watching very much TV, and if they're watching very much TV, I mean they're watching Disney movies right now. Disney Plus is the best investment you could make during the pandemic as we speak. So that's what's keeping them quiet. That's why we're not hearing some kids running in the back. But I think so. We're watching a lot of kids movies. Me personally, I haven't been able to watch a lot of TV. I know everybody got on that Tiger King binge for a little bit because I had to So I stayed up a little bit at night to watch some of that once I burned through those 7 episodes. I've actually been listening to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of your podcasts, to be fair. I want to hear a lot of the stories from these NBA players, WNBA players, right? We have Teresa Witherspoon on, right? And all these people that I was, heroes. So it's an honor just to even be on your podcast right now with some of the folks you've had on before. I've been trying to keep this earbud in my head. So if the kids are doing something, I keep this on and listen to as many podcasts as I can. Along the way, I think there's so much good content out there, and I think right now there's a massive boon in content. There's a lot more coach education material being put out there across the board. A lot of high performance stuff. I heard Coach Christian on here last week talking about Michael Gervais. That's a great podcast to be listened to. NPR has a good one called How I Built This. Right? A lot of startup companies and their founders, how it came up. I love that one. I think I get a lot out of that. There's a lot of water polo specific ones that are starting up that have been very good too. So there's no shortage of listening to it. And the last one I'll plug too is I've been listening to a lot of Stoicism. Big Ryan Holiday fan. I think for everybody out there, the Daily Stoic. one of his big books I know a lot of sports team read was Ego is the Enemy. The other one was The Obstacle is the Way. So he's turned a lot of that into, podcast type, very accessible material. And I think that's been very helpful for me, and I think really helpful for everybody, especially during these times, learning to control what you can control and keeping your mind right.
Before we get into everything water polo, I just want to bring in our special guest co-host, Sharif Farrow, who is a current firefighter for FDNY in New York City. He's also a triathlete. He's also a Golden Glove winner. He's done pretty much everything. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for your service out there in New York City, and hope you're staying safe. Can you give us a little quick overview of what the climate's like going on right now in New York City and that part of the country?
Well, the whole Northeast is pretty much on lockdown. Everybody's taking precaution, doing social distancing, taking the measures needed to keep everybody safe.
As firefighters, y'all have the mask, kit on, all that stuff already?
Yeah, we are PPE, protective personal equipment. We have plenty of that to help us out with special calls when we are out and about, helping on medical runs. It's been a little chaotic, but we have our friends and family persevering with us. Everybody's helping each other out, and we're gonna get through it. Keeping New York tough.
Okay, all right. Going stay right there on that topic. But Coach, you're in California, and we hear a lot of stuff coming out of California, especially with the governor and the mayor and all having all their different talks about how y'all gonna do y'all own thing when it's time to reopen. Give us the climate. What's going on out there in California right now with this coronavirus situation.
We're generally in the same spot as the Northeast. Like Sharif said, we're on lockdown. Everybody's sheltering at home. Everybody's staying put. And generally doing a good job of it. I know the media has hyped up a couple little spots of some protests coming up, where people are shouting for liberation. But I would say for the most part, the state's doing a phenomenal job of just everybody staying put, right, trying to flatten the curve altogether. So there's been a lot of joint effort. It certainly doesn't come with a lot of angst, where I think people are anxious to get outside and anxious to be active again and anxious to get the economy open. But I think everybody's doing their part, and it's pretty cool to see when you could look at the traffic reports or you look at any of the sky. There's less smog. There's almost no smog flying over Los Angeles, and the freeways are empty, and that's almost never happened, right? So it's a beautiful thing to see where people are actually really trying to work together to make this work.
Actually, I was reading a report the other day about how you mentioned the smog and the pollution and traffic in Dubai. It's like the clearest days they've had in the last 30-something years, where just the pollution is just non-existent. So I definitely can understand that. Being a guy from Texas, we got people driving around cars everywhere. It's like everything just went to a complete stop. Yeah, so Coach, stand right there. The biggest hot topic that we've heard with the coronavirus situation, leagues canceling, things being postponed, the Olympics, the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. You're a very, very integral part of that with USA Water Polo. Just give us some insight on, leading up to the days and the conversations y'all was having before they decided to postpone the Olympics.
Yeah, it was definitely a stressful time, and it was a lot of time of uncertainty. And so, just my role with the teams before the Rio Olympics, and then moving now forward as a high performance director, high performance officer, is essentially like a general manager, right? So like I general manage both of the squads, and so I got coaches who run the team. And we don't necessarily have a facility, right? That's our own yet. We're working on that, right? So different than some of these places. I got a men's team that's working out in one facility, women's team that's working out in another facility. Both facilities were dealing with their own timelines of when they would feel safe to leave people in or kick people out, right? So that wasn't uniform. We got our athletes from all over. We had athletes actually playing. Some people on our men's team were playing abroad in leagues in Spain, leagues in Europe. We had an athlete playing in Croatia. So we got athletes in Europe on the men's side. We got our women's team was in full-time training in one spot. Some were still in also finishing school. So all kinds of different levels of involvement with our athletes. So really the 2 weeks, I would say the first 2 weeks of March were really stressful, just trying to figure out, hey, what are we going to do to make this uniform and to keep our athletes safe? But also, if these Olympics don't get postponed, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot while we're trying to train a peak, which is we were about a month away from naming the squads, right? So when we finally went away, we were 4 weeks away from announcing the teams, which was, for some of these people, let's call it a group of 18 athletes or so vying for about 12 or 13 spots on the team, right? So that's a pretty stressful thing for them to be dealing with at that time, and then to have it pulled out from under them before the naming of the teams and before we even knew the Olympics were going to get postponed was, again, another kind of stressful time. Something else we were going through is we were trying to think about Spain. You all probably heard about what's happening in Spain at that time, and it was getting pretty bad there before it got bad here. We had athletes who were there playing in leagues. Wow. And we were like, there were a couple of nights in a row where we were just trying to quickly get them on planes to get them back to the States and get them home safe before the Trump administration decided to ban travel right in and out of Europe at that time. So we beat that buzzer by like 24 hours, right? Wow. So we got our boys home within 24 hours of that ban coming through. So all that being said, it was just setting the scene of what was kind of a stressful moment. But then I think once the announcement came that the Olympics were going to be postponed, I think everybody breathed a little bit of sigh of relief, because then it's better to know than to be uncertain, right? Than to live in that uncertainty. And once everybody knew, then now the challenges of trying to backtrack from there. We know the end result is going to be potentially an Olympic Games in July of 2021. Now we got to figure it out from here. So
there's a lot of things that go on the back end with athletes that compete in the Olympics. Have to train for 4 years. Just kind of give some insight on just the development and the training leading up to this, and now how not being able to compete this year will maybe put some damper in some kids' mind or some people mind moving forward.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, Evarist. I mean, you guys know, and I think maybe not everybody out listening would appreciate that athletes that are training for Olympic Games, especially in a sport like ours, like water polo, they're generally amateurs. So even if I say people are playing in professional leagues in Europe, they're not getting rich off of that, right? That's they're making enough money to live, eat, get better at the sport they want to play, have a cultural experience, living abroad. But the reality is these are NCAA amateur athletes who, with a lack of a professional league, right, that are either recently graduated or some are still in school. And then any older athlete we have has now manipulated their life to be able to play the sport, right, without being able to make a lot of money doing so. And that's not just water polo, that's a lot of Olympic sports, right? So then when you say, hey, the Olympics are going to be out 1 year, now you're telling that same athlete, hey, you took a year off school, yeah, maybe you can't go back to school, or maybe you do, and then your training gets sacrificed. These professional leagues may not be happening. Hey, you got to stick around a year, but you're not going to be able to go back and make the money and have that experience abroad. So we're in the middle of that right now, right? And it's a case-by-case basis with all the athletes and just trying to work with them. But I think it's a really good opportunity for everybody in our country to realize that if you want to be an Olympic athlete, other than the people that you work with closely in the NBA or professional sports, right, that move over to that, USA Basketball, different story, that these are amateur athletes that need some support, and there is no government support, right? In the United States, the government does not support the Olympic athlete movement, right? This comes from a private a nonprofit private entity called the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, right? USAWP, that's different. So it's good for everyone to understand that. Where our competitors are coming out of Europe, South America, where these are fully government funded, the entire country behind the team. Here, it's a little more pieced together, so it's much more complex, I should say. Yeah.
Well, two things that you mentioned about being paid as an athlete through the other countries. Behind that, how come the U.S. does not pay or kind of fund the athletes in situations not just like this, but in general?
Yeah. No, that's honestly a good question for our congressmen and women, right? And it's something that happens in that sense, because there was something called the Ted Stevens Act that came out a few decades ago, and that kept athletes at the amateur level, right, coming into the Olympic Games. Now things have changed with again the professional sports that come into that. So the United States Olympic Committee, they find a way to help fund. So it's not that athletes aren't making any money, right? So the United States Olympic Committee and NGBs like ourselves, like USA Water Polo, we have to build our entire business model and with some help, obviously with the USOPC, to find ways to fund the athlete competition, their training, right? Their needs, their monthly stipends, right? All these things come from us. So they're getting it. And they're getting some, and for some, it's a good living. It reaches a point though, right, where if you have a spouse, a partner, children, right, beyond ambitious, where there's limitations, I think, to what that you could do with that kind of monthly stipend that you get. But it's not that they're getting nothing, but it's coming from a level where it's essentially enough for them to train, right? And then you couple that with, if they're doing that, are they working? Are they getting internships, right? Are they doing other things outside of the pool to keep their careers advancing? As many of them are have college degrees already and are trying to look ahead in their careers. So it's happening, and it works. Obviously, it's worked well for us. We've won a couple of gold medals on the women's side, won a silver medal on the men's side in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
It happens, right? It works. But crises like these really shine a light on it, is my point, Sharif, you know?
Along with that, talking about a crisis like this and not having Olympics and waiting another year, what happens with the older athletes? I know for USA Boxing, they changed it a couple of years ago where it's 19 to 40 years old. After 40 years old, that's it. You know, your time is over in the ring. What about for USA Polo? Is there an age requirement that they get cut off?
No. And for us, if the athlete wants to continue to train and prepare, regardless of their age, we're going to allow them that opportunity, right? As long as they're earning a spot in the training group, we want them there. You know, our actually issue goes the other way, right? Because of the situations I described before, the challenge that we've had over the years is to keep athletes older in the process, right? So you can get an athlete who's younger, stick around, because if you're in college and you get some exemptions, maybe you take a year off, you get the Olympic waiver from the NCAA, right? And you kind of work through that. We've had plenty of that. And maybe a few years after college, we keep them around. Generally, the average age of our team is always around 22, 21. Our men's team's been younger, right? But if you look at the gold medal winning men's teams over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 Olympics, their average age is around 29 years old, right? Anywhere between 30, right? So the challenge is for us, we want those athletes to be older, right? For us to be competitive, we want them to be older, specifically on the men's side. On the women's side, right, where the average age of the gold medal winning teams has been around 23, 24. And we've been able to match that with our system here, right? So it works out, it lines a little bit better in that way.
So, Coach, this is go back a little bit. We talk about, you know, the average age being about 21, 22. I don't want to say it's a red flag, but people in minority communities around the country, specifically people of color, you know, that don't swim, that have never heard about water polo. You know, like myself, I grew up in Texas. I didn't know about water polo till I met you in 2006. Right. I mean, I was 20 years old at that time. I thought I heard water polo. I'm like, you know, where the horses at? You know, in the water. I didn't know anything about water polo. It's not because I didn't like it. I just never heard about it. That water polo, lacrosse, crew. Like, I didn't know anything about that stuff till I came to Bucknell in 2006 when I met you. So, what do you think is the next, or what do you strive in as yourself being a minority to help grow the game from more at the grassroots level, branching out outside of California and on like the East Coast of California?
No, that's a loaded question. There's a lot to that. Hey, first of all, not only did you not know anything about water polo in 2006 when you came to Bucknell, we were in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, right? Like, we were in the middle of Pennsylvania. The second you got off campus, right, there was horse and buggy and Mennonites. And,
Amish.
I mean, so that comes within itself, right? And then to have a water polo program there and a historic water polo program there, that was a whole other thing. And from where you're at, Texas, one of the interesting things, Evarist, I'll tell you too, is that starting in the fall of 2021, again, if everything continues on pace here and we all recover and we get out of this this pandemic, the UIL in Texas, as you know, right, the governing body of sports for high school sports in Texas, is going to start sponsoring boys and girls water polo officially in the fall of 2021. So since 2006,
really, that's a
great deal. That's big right there. At UIL is big too.
Yeah, that's big. So shout out to all our people in Texas who made that happen, and they've been working on that for 20 years, right? So when we met in 2006 at Bucknell, I did have a couple of Texas athletes. Every once in a while, I'd get a Texas athlete to come in that we would recruit there. Now the reality is that becomes a high school sport, UIL level in Texas. You're going to start seeing a huge boon in participation there. You're going to see different athletes access. It's a huge game changer, right? Because y'all know, I mean, California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, right? One of the big states that have, like, where athletics is thriving, right, across the board. I'm not talking about aquatics, just aquatics, and I'll address that question in a second. Just athletics in general, right? Where there's these big ecosystems for sports, and on the institutional level, scholastic level, that's going to translate to our
money
sport.
level too, economics, money behind it in those states.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. And you see it in hoops, you see it in football, right? You see it in all the sports, right? Where those are this kind of big states. So a state like Texas to kind of have put its backing behind water polo, it's going to be big. But you're right that that access is now slowly coming its way. It's taken a long time for that access to come, and for people that look like us, right, and people who come from communities of color, there was a Good Time magazine article I want to say about maybe 7-8 years ago that came out, said that 50% of Americans can't swim, period, right? Like 50% of Americans don't know how to swim. And then among that 50% of Americans that can't swim, there's a disproportionate amount of that number are people of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
So generally that's the case. And we can get into the history of why that is, and access to pools, and, you know, being banned from the beaches, being banned from the pool. That there's a whole history that's a wonderful thing for everybody to learn and understand why that's the case now, right? Why communities of color have such hard access to learn to swim. But because of that, right, our sport tends to be a fairly homogeneous, right? And so within that subsect, right, within that subsect of people we have, it's, you know, affluent, it's fairly affluent, and again, fairly homogeneous. The way to combat that is going to have to be access to these facilities, right? And so things like the UIL I'm talking about, like if you're in a community of color and there's no pool there, but your school has a pool, right? And the school didn't offer the kind of programming that would allow you to even get in the pool in the first place, right? How are you ever going to learn how to swim? How are you ever going to learn to be in the water? So I think the way we're going about it is kind of building the infrastructure across the country, so that there's, you know, one of our slogans is like polo in every pool. If we can have every pool and understand there's this sport called water polo, then I think the access points grow. And as the access points grow, you'll see a more diverse group of people start playing the sport.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. You know, New York doesn't have that much water polo. I've been swimming since I was 4 years old. I've always been interested in the sport, but I've never had access. I have access to pool. I could swim, but there was no water polo.
Right.
You know, I understood and got into the sport a little later. Still haven't done it. You know, even though, but I do watch it when it's on the Olympics. I'm in. You have viewership from me. I would like to know personally, just because I've swam myself. How do you recruit your athletes for polo? Obviously, you have to have the base for swimming, but how do you get that transition from, you know what, we're going to take you because you're a great swimmer and you're going to be a polo player. Yeah. Or, you know, you got a great arm, you know, you play baseball, I need to get you in the water. I'm kind of curious in the process on how you kind of pick your athletes, get your athletes, and also recruit.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think there's two parts to that. One, I would say, is the last 10 years is very different than prior to that, right? So the last 10 years, with the growth of youth sports in America and the growth of the youth sports business in America, you've seen a huge boom in water polo clubs, water polo competition, water polo events at the 12 and under, 14 under, 16 under, 18 under level.
Okay.
So now this starts to mirror what's happening in other sports, right? Where there's like this ecosystem of AAU type sports, right? Of junior youth sports. And that's actually growing tremendously. And in New York, even we have 2 clubs now in Brooklyn, right? We got Greenwich, Connecticut, not too far, playing a lot of water polo, right? So like in your area, you're starting to see that how's it happening? It's happening at the club level. So because of that infrastructure building in the age group level across with clubs, U.S. Water Polo, about 2000, after the Beijing Olympics, right, really invested into something called an Olympic Development Program, right, where then all those clubs that are already playing kind of on that age group level will help identify their best athletes and then feed them into our Olympic Development Program. And once they get fed into that Olympic Development Program, which represents different regions across the country, right? And they all kind of come together for competitions and tryouts over the year. Then you take the base of, you know, probably 50,000 athletes playing water polo across America and narrowing it down to a 14 under national team, a 16 under national team, an 18 and under national team, right? And then those feed into our junior team, senior team, right? Athletes that end up going on to the Olympics.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that's more recent, right? That's more recent.
Yeah, that's still new.
Years. Yeah, because with the where you see that bearing fruit, or the fruition of this is really happening as we speak, right? So if I were to look at our current men's and women's teams that were competing to go to Tokyo, many of them had gone through the process in one way, shape, or form. Many of them had actually even gotten cut in the process along the way, right? Which is, there's value in that as well. You get cut, and then you get re-identified in college, or You miss the process when you were younger, but then you get re-identified at another point in college or in our national league or other events that we see. And so at some point there's these different avenues that everybody kind of comes back to at the end. But because of it, if you were to ask some of our the athletes on our women's team, they would say, and they've been saying this in the press before, that they met a lot of their teammates when they were younger in the Olympic development program. So they've kind of kept in touch and had bonds along the way. Same with our men's team, it's happening. But the older our teams get and the older the Olympic development program gets, it's the more of that continuity you'll see, right? So again, 10 years is pretty young, I guess, in relation to what the long-term outcomes are going to be. But prior to that, to your point, Sharif, I mean, the way you found water polo is the way I found water polo. I like Ever said, I played high school basketball, so I was on the basketball court, and then someone said, "Hey, you should jump in the pool. It's pretty hot in Southern California." And I didn't even play water polo I didn't play water polo. I didn't even know what it was before my freshman year in high school. I had no idea, right? I'm like, what is this sport? They didn't play it in Egypt too much at that time, right? We didn't play it in Houston when we got there. It wasn't on my radar. But the basketball gym was near the pool, and I had a friend who said, "Hey, after basketball season, you should jump in." So I tried swimming right after I tried basketball, and then jumped in and started playing water polo the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. I mean, and if you were to try, this is again, we're talking about like early 90s or whatever, right? Mid 90s. Try to do that now in the sport, you're way behind. Just like
yeah,
you're behind. Like, how does that happen, right? Like, but back then, and as the sport was developing, again, prior to this recent boom, you were taking guys off the basketball court, girls off the basketball court. You were getting baseball players, you were getting softball players who just like, hey, let me try this sport out, and let's see where it goes. And so now it's become more formal. The college game is growing. There's more varsity programs at the NCAA level, right? So you're seeing high school grow, club grow, college grow. All these things are happening, so it becomes a little more formalized. But before, it wasn't like that.
So I got a question going back to the grassroots real quick, Coach.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, there's a lot of reasons why minorities, don't get in the pool, don't know how to swim, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a father of a 7-year-old son. You're a father of the 2 children.
Yeah.
What are you saying to these parents that are in minority communities that say, "Hey, water polo was cool, it's fun, come out and try it"? Like how are you changing the parents' mind that water is bad, or what are y'all saying and doing as far as that's concerned, specifically to the minority community?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because just on a personal level, I'm really passionate about it, right? And I think there's the other people in our sport that look like us are also very passionate about it, right? Because there's so few of us together, right? So we have kind of this like informal conglomerate of minorities in water polo that think about these
maybe,
things.
hey, look, maybe you start the Minority Water Polo Association, the MWPA.
Yeah. I'm the unofficial president of it right now. Let's put it that way, right?
Hey, I'll be your secretary.
Yeah, hey, we could all do this together. If you're a swimmer, you can come our way, right? So you get
out west.
Yeah. So it's true. We just get excited about it. So it happens on an informal level, I would say, Evarist, right? It happens all over where we're advocating for this in our community. So you see people like, Brenda Villa, Hispanic young woman from Commerce, California. She played in 4 Olympics, right? And I think another good for people outside of water polo. Everybody in water polo knows about Commerce. People outside of water polo don't know about Commerce. The city of Commerce in Southern California, right? A vast majority Hispanic community, right? In LA County, and in that area, they have a sponsored aquatics program at the city pool where it's at, and so they've had a water polo club now for a long time. It was started by a few people several decades ago. But you see the fruition of that because the city sponsored it. The city puts in money. They're able to give access at that time, and then so the same thing happens. In some other parts of the country. Where there's access given that way. And then the promotion comes. People like Brenda Villa, Ashley Johnson, our gold medal winning goalkeeper from the 2016 Olympics, first African-American ever to make a team, right? A team in the United States on the women's side. She's a big advocate for it. Her sister, we had an Olympic hopeful on the men's side, Max Irving, who was coming up. And again, these are conversations we're all having internally. And I think to answer your question specifically, like what we're telling the parents is we just got to make sure that they know that the pool in the area has low barrier access for them to participate. And I'll be honest, and just direct that most of that infrastructure that I was talking to you guys about before, the AAU type model of the 12 and under, 14 or 16 under, 18 under polo that's growing across America, that hasn't necessarily been their number one priority, because when you're building a club, you need finances, right, to build your club, and the economics of those clubs, I don't think have done a great job of addressing it. As an NGB, same thing for us. We want to make sure that we have an infrastructure so that we can build our sport, right? I think it's unfortunate, but what becomes a luxury within this type of youth sports system in America, it's a luxury to think about diversity. It's a luxury to think about, right, these young, these communities, but that can't be the case moving forward. And that's something I'm going to obviously personally and then professionally going to spend a lot of time with in the near future to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, because when I think about water polo, now that I've grown up into as a strength and conditioning coach the last 15 years, both in college and in the NBA and overseas, like the very first thing I think about when it comes to water polo is that these are amazing athletes. Like they're tall, they're in shape, they're fit. They seem like they can seamlessly look like they could play any sport, basketball or football. But the issue that I always see is that none of them ever look like me. It always seems like the kids are coming from the Ivy League schools, or that it always seems like it's more of like an elitist type sport. And but like you said, things like getting the UIL involved, having more grassroots, spreading out to different parts of the country will help that, So I think that, USA Water Polo and everybody else involved getting that word out will help more and more, because like an old guy like me who's been in the game a long time, I look at water polo and I know they're such great athletes because I'm a strength coach, but it's like, how can I appeal that to like my son or to my nephew or things of that nature?
Yeah, and you're 100% right. And that's why we try to break down that stigma everywhere we go, right? That's why when we have these athletes that are very vocal, people like myself that are very vocal about this and not shying away from it when in interviews like this, I'm not going to shy away from it. It's something we could do a better job of, and we have to break that stigma down for everybody, right? And I think the first and foremost thing is it's the water, it's facilities, right? It's facilities and it's access to those facilities, because but water polo is expensive, right? For all of us growing up, right? In Egypt, I'm sure it's the same in Nigeria, right? For you, my cousins, when I went back to Egypt to visit, their favorite sport is soccer, right? Is European football, because they could throw down a couple of dirty T-shirts, right? And that's the goal. And then they could roll up some rubber bands or get a ball and they kick it around and we play soccer for hours, right? So think about that extreme level of accessibility for the sport versus the extreme inaccessibility for something like water polo, where you got to get into the pool. And then once you get into the pool, are there lifeguards? And once you get into that pool, is it deep enough? And once you get into that pool, are there balls? Are there goals? Are there other people to play with? You can't just shoot around by yourself very often, right? So there's just really a lot of barriers just from a physical standpoint that we have to start breaking down. So when we say polo in every pool, we're making sure, hey, do all these pools have balls? Do they have goals? Do they have access, for people could just come in? A basically trained coach. We have a program called Splash Ball. Just some introduction where, hey, it doesn't matter what suit you're wearing. You don't have to wear the traditional water polo suit. You don't have to even float the whole time like you guys are talking, A-beater the whole time. Can you get on a floating device? Can you stand on the bottom and just learn to play a game and have fun? So that's what I would say to your son and to others who are 6, 7, 8 years old. You can go stand on the bottom of the pool, throw a ball around. You realize this is a lot of fun. I'm outside or indoors in the water. I got a ball. There's a goal. I mean, it can be really addicting once they get to that like basic level of it.
You probably can get a lot more people in the pool by water polo itself, giving them a ball, having them play with it, and then getting them in the water. Like that would be their transition into the water, instead of just saying you need to learn to swim or you need to get in the water. Well, let's have some fun in the water. Let's make this a game. You don't have to just learn to swim. You learn to swim while you learn to play.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what splash ball is. That's what introduction of water polo is. That's what all those things. We'll let you sit on a noodle. We'll let you float on the ball, right? The ball itself is a flotation device, right? So like even my kids, when I try to get them in, they're not great swimmers yet. My boys are 5 and 6 years old, right? So they're water safe, but they're not swimmers yet. But if I give them a ball when they're in the pool, right, they just sit on the ball and they can float on it. And to your point, Sharif, you're 100% right. Now they're like, that if we go in the pool without the ball, they get upset, right? They're like, well, where's the ball? Yeah, like I got to be in here. What's the point, right? What's the point? So that correlation is strong, and so we got to make sure these pools all have balls. And so there's
yes,
and that's our job, right? Yep, exactly.
I wanted to make sure that athletes had access to a shooting machine that they could take anywhere. So I came up with the concept to fold it into a duffel bag. I ended up prototyping with my friend Xavier, welding our first prototypes in the garage. I made it for myself I also made it for the millions of other athletes out there that are trying to reach their dreams and trying to make it out.
All right, welcome back to No Referees Podcast. Had to take a quick break. We're back with John Abdou from USA Water Polo and Sharif Farrow with FDNY. There was an article that came out recently about the growth of USA Water Polo and the growth of water polo in general around the country. It just highlighted the dollars and cents that goes into USA Water Polo and water polo as a whole. Just touch base on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we talked about earlier, I mean, there's a big upswing in people learning how to swim. There's a big uptick in people want to take advantage of their the facilities that they have. Access is starting to become greater, right, to the water. Like we've been talking about, like, again, can get better, needs to get better. We're going to keep working on that. But with the growth of this accessibility and the awareness of water polo, you're seeing it grow, and more colleges, more high schools adding the sport on the varsity level. That's going to have a trickle down effect too. And then there's also no secret here, right? For the 2008, 2012, 2016 Olympics, those were some of the first games that were really accessible on the internet and broadly broadcast, right, for everybody to see. And we were all joking earlier that I didn't even know about what water polo was till I was the end of my freshman year in high school, right? You didn't know about it till 2006, till we met in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, right? Sharif's a swimmer, never really had access to it before. But now you're talking about a generation of kids that grew up with the internet, with the accessibility of the games being broadcast, and then every 4 years they get a chance to look at it. So that the awareness level, it has risen a lot, but that takes time, right? And then now you're starting to see some of the fruit that comes with that awareness of the broadcasting and the accessibility of the sport.
I don't know what goes on in the 4 years in between Olympic Games. Are y'all just training? Are the kids just in college? Do y'all have competitions? Kind of walk us through like what the timeline is leading up to. Like you had the 2016 Rio Olympics. What are they doing in 17, 18, 19? What are they doing during that time frame?
Yeah, that's a good question. But because of the diversity of the nature of the team, the makeup of the team, not the ethnic diversity we were talking about before, but like if I'm talking about athletes who are in college, we have athletes who have families, or athletes who are playing professionally in Europe or different times. Because the team is different, usually the first 2 years after the Olympics, most people kind of go where they need to go. They go back to playing in college, they go back to playing in Europe. They may have a job and training locally in small groups while they take care of their families or advance their careers. And then usually by that third year of the quad, right, we start getting into something we call like full-time training, right? So that's about 18 to 24 months or so where the team is generally together. Now that can look different at different times, but usually I would say about 2 years before the game, it starts ramping up a little bit with getting the group together. That also in water polo, though, there's in the odd years, there are world championships. So in 2017, there was a world championship, aquatics championship in Budapest. So we took a little bit of break after Rio, and then most of the team got back together, right? Some athletes retired, some people transition, new faces come on, but then you go compete in a world championship and then hit the reset button on a yearly basis like that.
Do the professional European players, do they play in the Worlds and do they play in the Olympics as well? Are they allowed to? They are.
Yeah.
So how do you compete with pros that are playing all year round and be competitive? Not sometimes, but half your athletes, or athletes that have careers and then also work on the side, and it's just a huge mix. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's what we do. You hit the nail on the head, Sharif, right? You hit the nail on the head, because that's the challenge on the men's side, right? When you have professional men's water polo leagues that can pay people well into their 30s, right, to keep playing the sport year round professionally, pay them enough to, again, pay enough relative to living in the country that they live in, right? So water polo is definitely dominated by the former Yugoslavia, right? So you're talking about Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, Hungary. Hungary won gold medals in 2004, 2008, 2012, before Serbia winning in 2016 broke their streak, right? So there's a great infographic I show around sometimes where for the past 20 some odd years of Olympic gold medalists on the men's side, that all were born within a 100-mile radius. All right, all born with a 100-mile radius.
That's the thing. Yeah.
They homegrown.
Yeah, and it's happening, right? There you go. So, I mean, you think about we won a silver medal on the men's side. I think we're just talking about the men. The women are it's a different makeup, right, as it comes in this. But the last time we medaled in the Olympics on the men's side was 2008. And when we won the silver medal in 2008 and beat a lot of those teams along the way, if we're just talking specifically Olympic Games, that was because the majority of that group were professional athletes that stuck around and were a little bit, quote unquote, older. The big group of these European dudes, they started around some of the best players we've ever had to play our sport domestically and committed themselves not only to stick together, but also continue to play in Europe and played later in their life, so that our average age was a little bit closer to the one I was talking before. It wasn't perfect. It was still a little younger, but it was closer to that range, and they were professional athletes. And then the time before that for us to win medals came prior to we're in the 80s. The last time the USA men's water polo team won medals was in the 80s, and that's prior to the breakup of this Yugoslavia. So Yugoslavia used to be one team. There would just be one Yugoslavia team you'd have to play, and they'd be pretty darn good, right? And you'd see them, USA versus Yugoslavia, and a lot of gold medal games in international competition, including the Olympics in the 80s. But after 91, right, after these countries break up, now you take that one Yugoslavia and you turn into 4 countries, right? And then now the playing field spreads, and as you can see, what I said before about that 100-mile radius, that's where they've all kind of come from. So it's a challenge, but we're able to be competitive in our own way, because clearly we were able to do it in 08. Obviously, even recently, we won right before the Rio Olympics. We won a silver medal at the World League Super Final with our men. We're competitive, but that's what you hit on, Sharif, is always going to be the gap for us. Is you're talking about professional athletes versus amateur athletes in our sport, right? And so we have to continue to work to bridge that gap, and that's what we're doing as we build this infrastructure and grow the sport.
You were saying that some of your athletes go over to Europe and play. Now, do you promote that, and would you promote that even more and harder? Be like, you know what? We need you to continue to perform, go over to Europe, continue to play pro ball, so you're playing all year round, and come back. Let's get this gold medal for USA.
So absolutely, right. We highly encourage it. So even the stipends that we talked about that they get through USA Water Polo and the Olympic Committee, the support that we give them, we continue to provide that support for them, even if they go overseas and sign contracts, right? So we want to encourage them just to say, look, we're going to take care of you no matter what, and you're going to be taken care of, and we'd really like you to go. There's challenges in that. They're going to get better if they go to Europe. We know this for sure. It's clear. When we talk about that 2008 team, most of them played in Europe. A lot of them played at a high level. Some of them were the better players even out there, right? Like we were working. That league was in conjunction with our development. But now fast forward to 2020, okay, and talk about athletes that may have graduated from an NCAA institution with a great degree, and their roommates and their friends already making 6 figures out in jobs, in the marketplace. Some of them have spouses already, right? Or starting to get married, starting to settle down, starting to work on this. The idea of going to Europe for an extended period of time has become it's become a challenge, right? In the sense of where it's at, and those opportunities then become less. So it works both ways. The reality is this past season, we had more of our men's training group playing in Europe than ever before, right? So they were out there, but we had a lot of young guys hungry, want to take advantage of those opportunities. That market has also dropped, because if you're let's say you're a top Italian club team, or you're a top Croatian club team, do you really want to help the United States get a lot better at water polo by giving a fat contract to an American dude to come over and play? It doesn't always happen. It's not like they're running out there, right?
Coach, I got a question for you. In the event that you're running out of, let's say, pool talent, when you say I need to go get some elite swimmers, do you give a call to USA Swimming guys like Dave Durden and guys like that, coaches over there, and say, hey man, I need some players, I need some athletes. Send me, like, you hear about, I don't want to say like poaching talent, but how do you see that they got a swimmer over there that may not be, man, that ain't a good swimmer for y'all. That's a good polo player for us. Like, how do y'all ever have cross talks about that? Or if y'all do, like, how those things work?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And you see it a lot in the Olympic movement when you hear things like track. You see it in track and field, right? You see it in bobsled. You see it in like team handball. You'll see it where they're like, some of our guys will go to team handball, right? If they can't make our group, then some people move to team handball. Bobsled will pick up the track runners. So you see it more in the individual sports, and they can go kind of back and forth. With water polo, by the time, especially for swimming, so let's go back to what we talked about with youth sports. Swimmers are specializing at a very, very young age now, right? And then this is, again, a bigger difference than what we used to see 10, 15, 20, even 20 years ago, right? Now the people who are making that Olympic swim team, or the coaches that you're talking about, Evarist, have been specialized in swimming for a long time. So if that crossover ever happens, it's going to happen at a younger age, right? It happens at younger. You see it a lot on the high school level, right? You'll see it in that 16 under group. It's like, look, I'm either, someone's been playing both water polo and swimming, and they've been doing really good at both, and then they realize my college opportunity or my national team opportunity is going to come from one or the other, and then you see them make a choice, right? So water polo will lose athletes to swimming at 16 or under. Say, hey, look, I'm really fast. I got to go get that swim scholarship. I got to go that route. And then but then we also gain swimmers who are like, look, maybe I'm not going to excel as far as I want in swimming, right? At the highest of levels, I got a good chance to take these swim skills and transfer over to water polo and do well. We've also, look, I had an athlete in our pipeline on the men's side that I was pretty excited about. Born in 1999, 6'4", good athlete, good hands, good arm, baseball player. We had him in our pipeline. We're working him out up into the way. He was from the Pacific Northwest region. And then from where you're at right now, Evarist, the Chicago White Sox decided, hey, we're going to give this kid a minor league, baseball deal.
Hey, you can't turn that down.
Yeah, you can't turn it down, right? I'm saying, hey, stick around. Maybe you got a shot. Keep developing, and one day you can, go to Europe and play and all that. And we actually had a pretty good package to sell, but that's nothing like the, about $500,000 you got to pick up a minor league contract, right, and start working in the farm system for the White Sox kind of early on. So there is a talent. You're right. It's a good question. So there's a talent suck that comes out of us, away from us, and then we do get some talent that comes in, but it's at younger ages, and so the hard part for us is to keep them in the pipeline the whole way.
I was just thinking about that because you see a lot of the kids, like you said, your average age, is 20, 21, and that U16. So it's like almost they have 5 or 6 years of prime athletic talent in USA water polo. You have to maximize those years as best as you can, because the majority of your athletes are college kids.
Yeah. And now what I've been working on for the last several years, and what we've all been working on the last several years, is how do we extend that, right? So we have it's no secret what the challenge is, right? So now we're working on making sure that we get our athletes paid a little bit more money when they leave college. Again, not going to get rich, but is it enough to keep you whole, right, during this time? Can we find them some small marketing opportunities and for them to make a little money on the side, right, in marketing themselves in any place they can? Can you get them doing some camps and clinics where they can promote their expertise to make some money along the side there to again make them whole? And then can you get them internships and jobs in the area of their interest, right, that keep them going in that sense? And there's been a huge push for that lately, and organized by our board of directors, right, to make sure that we have people who are at the highest level of their field then can mentor our athletes, right, and connect them to jobs later. And so if you can create a pipeline where we could do that, and then the last thing in there is that we're working on building a facility in Irvine, in South Orange County, because the very first thing I talked about when we talked about coronavirus going down was that my athletes were all over the place, right? Everybody was all over the place. But if I could say, hey, here's this one spot, right? Here's your pool. You're going to train here. Find a job and a place to live within a 30-minute drive of here, right? That expands the opportunities that are available for them to stay in the game, right? So you got to have a home. You got to have a backbone of professional resources, and then you got to provide the basic needs for them. And that's what we're building towards to extend this pipeline even further. And I'm confident that's where we're heading, but that's not the kind of thing that happens overnight, right? It takes time, and that's what we're providing for the athletes right now.
You have to have a sign in that new facility that says water polo only.
That's right.
No swimming, water polo only.
Yeah, there will be one of those, but I don't know how publicly I can do it without getting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're saying, it's described like a practice facility, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be training and competition, though. I think one of the goals would be as we build towards having this facility to potentially be part of the hosting of the 2028 Olympics, right? Whether that's training or some of the group play games, right? Like you can build something that's training and competition, multiple pools, right? So the other things can be happening at the same time, and it becomes a training center. I mean, that's one of the challenges, talk about being the general manager of USA Water Polo versus being the general manager of one of the NBA teams you work for, Evarist, right? You can, as a general manager, I can pop out of my office, and say, look, I need to talk to an athlete. I need to talk to the training staff. I need to talk to the medical staff. I need to get the sports psychologist. I need to talk to the marketing department. Everybody's in the same building, pretty much.
Strength coaches. Hey, don't get the strength coaches.
Yeah. And for sure, they'll be the first people I'll be talking to, right? So So that's the whole point, right? Is having those, even a weight room, Everest. That's funny in itself. I mean, I was on a call yesterday where I'm still now trying to say, if the bands get lifted, shelter home gets lifted, how am I going to find a weight room for our men's team to lift in? That's literally one of the issues I had to spend a couple hours on the phone with yesterday. That shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't have to have the insecurity of a facility for an athlete, and the athlete shouldn't have to wake up and say, well, how am I going to get stronger today? How am I going to be physically ready to play in the Olympics, right? And this is the uncertainty we're sitting in. So we need that spot. It's a training spot, it's a competition spot, and we need that continuity. It'll build more relationships, and it'll build more of a community that helps keep them in the game longer, as we've been talking about. It keeps them older, keeps them there, playing further in their career.
What are you hearing from your counterparts who are in similar positions as you in other USA sport entities? You know, what are they saying about, you know, not having the facilities or being spread around? You know, I'm sure you're not the only one dealing with this situation. Now, what are your other counterparts saying as well?
They're in similar boats, right? We have a really good community. USOPC, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, they're high performance department. They have a high performance department that keeps us all together. So even as we're on Zoom right now on Monday morning, you know, all the high performance teams, Olympic teams, we get together every Monday at 10 for a collaboration under our leadership there from John Crawley, and he's the high performance director for teams at the U.S. Olympic Committee. And now we get together and we can trade stories like this. And we can, ironically, on Monday, this coming one is going to be from USA Volleyball. We're going to talk about some of their challenges. We work really closely with them because we're both Southern California kind of based sports, right? Where our facilities, offices are all kind of based near each other. And they're going through very similar challenges, right? They're going through exact challenges. And I think when you talk about Olympic sports, you got to break it down between team and individual, because it's much easier to navigate the individual side of things, from my perspective, right? Like, I know how it is for boxing, Sharif, right? And for swimming, right? It's okay if it's one swimmer who's going to be swimming in college or with their club coach. They can be at the facility with their private coaches, get together, they figure it out, and then we get together at different, you know, these multiple moments, but we know they're going to go back to a club that's going to take care of them, or they know they're going to go back to a place that's going to provide for them. But with team sports, the ability to kind of bring everybody together and build cohesion, tactically, technically, right? You know, everything that you have to do with a group, as a team, is much different. So the team Olympic sports share a lot of those same things that we're talking about, for sure.
I have to know, because you have the arm in a water polo and swimming, what specific training do you do for that combination? Because, you know, you're swimming, you're throwing hard, you're swimming hard, and you're doing sprint work in the pool. It's a lot of different mechanics than just being on the land and just being in the water. So it's a combination of both. Like, how do you specifically train for that?
I'm gonna pass over to Evarist. That's actually how Evarist and I met, right? He was my strength and conditioning coach for my water polo teams.
Water polo? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's how we met. But I'll tell you that he can get into the specifics. But the general, what you're talking about, the throwing and then swimming as fast as you can, and then getting up and throwing the ball as hard as you can, and then wrestling somebody else for long. Yes. This is all incredibly unnatural on the body, right? So the two places where you would imagine that the injuries happen are shoulders, massive shoulder injuries in water polo, and hip injuries, because you have to stay afloat the whole time. So we have to deal with shoulders and hips. And so there's a lot of injury prevention that goes into that. Evarist was a big part of that. He kept my guys and women healthy for the most part over at Bucknell, because it's injuries are inevitable when you're doing that unnatural movements you're talking about along the way. But specific exercises, Evarist, that's what you've been doing, man. So, yeah.
I know one thing we used to work on with your teams back then. I haven't trained water polo since then, but we did work on a lot of mobility, a lot of injury prevention, you know, a lot of flexion, flexibility stuff. And when it came to like cardio, you know, these are swimmers at heart. These are people who love to be in the pool. You know, some of the kids couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. You know, I just would try to make things a little bit different for them, make it unique. You know, have them run on the stairs with a snorkel in their mouth. You know, have them hold their hands over their head, running around on the track. You know, I just try to do things different. That was, you know, it's not unique to just running straight up and down the track or running around or something like that. You know, anybody can do that. But I wanted to make them uncomfortable, because when you play water polo, it's an uncomfortable sport to play. You know, you're doing a lot at one time. So those are some of the things I used to train. You know, these are college kids. You know, used to hate me for it, but you know, they won. You know, so
yeah,
that was good.
It worked. But we do, yeah, you're right. A lot of those shoulder bands kind of, inward motion, outward motion. We go through the whole thing, right, of making sure their shoulders are strong enough and prepared enough to, similar to swimmers, but we got to even do it more, right? Because
More, yeah, okay.
Because of all that throwing and wrestling that goes into it. And then, the hip side is generally on the goalkeeper side. Think about the goalkeeper, they do a lot more leg work than everybody else. So there's a lot of common that goes into that. So actually, and again, going back to the Olympic thing, one of the things I had to do when I took over in this director role about 7 years ago was make sure that we had even full-time medical managers, right? That was I had to find budget money to make sure that I had people who were there could help me with sports medicine, which then could help connect me to better strength and conditioning coaches for our athletes that could connect us to the nutritionists that we need, everything that we need to kind of bring us full circle. Again, if you're training in a pro sport or something else, these resources and that the access to those things is pretty easy. But when an Olympic sport for us, we didn't even have full-time sports medicine managers till about 5 years ago. Right. And so that's a new thing for us. And it's paid dividends to the strength conditioning, injury prevention, all those things across the board. So big shout out to them. They keep our athletes healthy. Chris and Larney, if they ever hear this, love you guys because they're doing what they do for us to keep these athletes in the pool.
Just curious, what do you have your athletes doing now while they're quarantined? I didn't know these quarantine workout maneuvers that you guys are doing. Keep strong and keep swimming.
Yeah. Well, keeping swimming is a tough one, right? Some people have access to a small pool or a jacuzzi or something. Maybe they can do a little egg beater or something. But yeah, I would say most athletes don't have access to a pool. So our strength and conditioning coaches, I've been sending them workouts like home workouts that they can do on their own, in their living rooms. Our teams meet 2 to 3 times a week at a minimum. So what they're doing is they're in Zoom, right? So we'll set up team meetings. We set up little microsites for the teams right when the lockdown started, right? Shelter at home started, so that they can go to that site. That's where they get their strength and conditioning needs, sports psychology needs, nutrition needs, basic information on how we function as a group, video analysis. Both our teams are doing a lot of video analysis these days, particularly our men. It's a good chance to get ahead. I mean, if you think about it, there could be another kind of awakening for our athletes that year. And a lot of we've talked about it negative and how do we adjust and how we go, but there could be some positives in that as well, right? So if I'm a 21-year-old athlete that was trying to make the game this summer, I'm gonna be 22 next summer. I'm gonna be a year older. I could be a year stronger, and I could be a year wiser by watching a lot of game film and watching and breaking down my opponents and studying who the teams are going to be. We know that we've qualified for the games. We know other teams qualified for the games. That's not going to change, right? Between now and then, a couple of new teams will get in on those last spots, last chance. So there's a lot of at-home workouts, a lot of at-home video analysis, and just trying to keep them together as best as we can.
Well, Coach, before we get you out of here, what is the next year going to look like for you and USA Water Polo leading up to the postponement of these Olympic Games next year in 2021? What's the next 12 months going to look like for you?
That's a good question. I mean, even the next few months, what the next few months can look like for any of us, right? We're gonna keep recording some of these types of things in our home with our white walls in the back. I think the next few months is what can we figure out about the certainty of training and other competitions. So we know that the Olympic Games are going to be in July to early August of 2021, but everything that backlogs to that, which was what you're talking about, is other competitions, right? So for example, the World Championships are scheduled for 2021. That's going to have to be rescheduled sometime. It would have been the same time as the Olympics. So is that going to happen before the games now? Is it going to happen after the games now? What other major world competitions can we get to? Will the pro league start again? If pro league start again, are we going to allow athletes to go back and play in Europe? If colleges open up again and those athletes who are taking time away from school, do we allow them to go back to school and keep getting their degree? I mean, these same athletes we talked about in their age, they don't want to graduate from college when they're 28, 29. They want to finish their degree. They want to finish their degree when they were with their cohort. So we got to see when the colleges are going to open up. Is it going to be online learning? Are we going to have access to those facilities? So a lot of it is uncertain. But I think what we're waiting to find out on is what's the access to facilities, what's the access to the schools, what's the access to the leagues, and what's the access to the international competition calendar as it would be, usually leading up to the Olympics. So still some uncertainty, but the second we can start figuring out a little bit of calendaring, we're going to jump on it. Everyone's in a holding pattern, ready to go.
Well, Coach Abdou, we appreciate you joining us on No Referees podcast. it's been so long since we haven't got a chance to catch up, but good to catch up with you and just to see your trajectory, how you've grown from high school coach, college coach, being a professional coach, and being involved with the Olympics. And it's just, I meant to tell you when I saw you on TV with the 2016 Olympics in Rio, I was like, dang, Coach got a full beard now.
Hey, 2006 was a long time ago, Evarist, at this point, right? 14 years ago. But I appreciate it. It's an honor to be on here. Thank you. I mean, it's been great. And I think, honestly, the best thing that's come out of being involved in sport for this long at the collegiate and Olympic or whatever level on the way is building relationships and meeting people. And, there's a whole group of people out here just trying to do the best that we can with what we got. And so it's been fun to watch you as well. It's an honor to be on here. The other guests you've had on here have been great. Sharif, great to meet you for the first time too. It's appreciate
you as well. Pleasure.
And what you do for our people, and it's great to continue to be around high performing individuals. And so it's great to be a part of this network. So appreciate y'all.
I appreciate it, Coach. Thank you for the kind word. Maybe Sharif can go work with one of those satellite clubs out there in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
You know what? I will look into it for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna connect you right after this. I got you now. I'm gonna connect you right away. So
please.
Yeah, I got you, man.
Everyone, please again go follow Coach Abdou on his Twitter page at Coach_Abdou and on his IG page at Coach Abdou for all the latest things. USA Water Polo. You can see him chill with his family and his boys, and you can see the eclectic mix of basketball jerseys that he has. that any Mitchell and Ness fan will be happy to see.
Damn straight. Mitchell and Ness, baby, for sure.
We appreciate you coming on No Referees Podcast, Coach. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Take care, John.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the No Referees Podcast. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening to this show, and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on social media at No Referees Pod. Till the next episode, we out.